Good afternoon, dear colleagues. So this is Mediacentru Ukraine. Our guest today is Olga Trofimtseva, Ambassador at Large with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, coordinator of the Exporters and Investors Council. My first question for you would be about the exports of Ukrainian produce and its status as of today. Good morning. When we are talking about the export of agrarian produce, since the beginning of the active hostilities, the situation has been dire regarding the blocked seaports, the ports of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. They were responsible for more than 70, let's say between 70 to 75% of export delivery, and agricultural agrarian sector are now undergoing hard times regarding the exports of its produce. The best solution, the best way out for the situation would be unblocking the ports and the free export of our produce using the sea routes. Unfortunately, at the moment, this scenario doesn't seem to be possible, and it's not possible in the nearest time. Regardless, all the efforts done by our partners, first of all, Turkey, to whom we are eternally grateful. We are taking part in the negotiations. We are taking part in the negotiations through the United Nations organization. Unfortunately, there is no visible progress in unblocking the ports in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Speaking of alternative export channels, both Ukrainian government and Ukrainian business have done a lot, and we see that both Ukraine and Ukrainian companies do what they can in order to export the produce using rail transport through the borders with our next door neighbors, Poland, first of all. And we also have successful shipment of grain through the ports of Romania. Therefore, regardless of what's happening, we have to understand that rail transport cannot cover 100% for sea transport. Nevertheless, we have to develop this type of transport, and we cannot disregard it. Therefore, we cannot use our ports at the moment due to Russian aggression, due to active hostilities, due to sea routes being mined. The whole world feels the impact of this war. We were talking about export of grain and assistance. Turkey, being our partner, exert a lot of efforts, and they do a lot in order to find some effective way of unblocking the ports. And these are the ways that could be in line with the interests of Ukraine, because here we are talking about our ports and our grain and our security and safety. On the other hand, we see that all our partners are doing a lot, starting from the United States, all EU countries, and not only EU countries. So they all do in order to help us develop ground routes for export so that Ukraine can at least export part of its produce. 1.5 million grain has already been exported using ground transport, meaning automobile transport and rail transport. Their assistance is also about simplification of all procedures. So this is customs procedures, phytosanitary procedures, all non-tariff elements of regulation. So they have all been simplified as much as possible so that Ukrainian grain reaches its destination and its client. The second is they are helping us with building infrastructure. Because what we felt and what our European partners felt is that European infrastructure and logistics was not ready when it comes to the scope of trade of grain products of Ukraine. So that's why we need to do a lot for the infrastructure to be more effective, to show better performance so that we can ship such volumes of grain. Germany helps a lot, Poland helps a lot, so they build transit hubs on the border crossing points so that Ukrainian rail carriages move faster between countries and reach the ports where they could be, where the grain could be loaded onto the ships. We've heard a lot from the United States, from President Biden, that they are also going to help us build such temporary capabilities to store grain in Poland, not far from Ukrainian border, in order to help unload Ukrainian capabilities of grain storage, because the fall is coming and the new harvest is on its way. We have a question from our audience. Andriy Shevchenko, Mediacentru Ukraine. According to you, how will the structure of Ukrainian export going to change, or is it already changing? Do you see any sectors where export is going to be less attractive or impossible? Maybe there are some new segments. And when we are talking about grain produce and agricultural produce, do you see any adjustments of Ukrainian farmers? So do they try to produce new types of goods because of the complex situation with the export? Speaking of export, I already mentioned that all sectors feel the impact, negative impact of blocking the ports, because all our main export sectors, so we're using ports and sea routes. Therefore, this complicates the situation in all sorts of sectors. I believe that there will be some drops in the revenue, export revenue. I'm talking here about metallurgic industry, about oil industry, because they made 40% of all revenue. What we received last year, so that was more than $27 billion. This year, this result will definitely be not possible, but we are doing all we can so that we can meet at least high season. This is fall 2022, so that we can do at least some steps in order to address the issue of blocking ports, mainly unblocking ports to be more precise. But when we are talking about the structure of export, we need to analyze the status of those sectors in Ukraine. We understand that there are a lot of major companies, metallurgic, agricultural, they suffered because of active hostilities on one side. Others had to suspend or terminate their activities because they are based on the territory where there are active hostilities. Some capabilities and export-oriented companies were completely destroyed or partially destroyed. Some companies, agricultural companies, are still on temporarily occupied territories, which also enables them to produce their goods or even think about the export of the produce abroad. When we are talking about the change in structure, I believe that the direct impact in agricultural sector will be the growth. Well, when I'm talking about the growth, it's humble growth, so nothing to compare with the last year, but there will be the growth in the export of produce to EU countries. There is another positive achievement. We all know about the additional liberalization of the trade regime between EU and Ukraine. I'm talking about the fact that the zero tariffs and quotas for Ukrainian produce. This will enable those who are less dependent on sea export and sea routes and Asia, export to Asian countries. And I'm talking about Southern Eastern Asia. So this will enable those countries to export to EU. But unfortunately, generally speaking, so when we are talking about export-oriented sectors, metallurgic sector, agricultural sector, machine building sector, chemistry, chemical industry. So here, unfortunately, the situation is critical, and it's very important to unblock the sea routes and ports. Getting back to the question about the negative impact of sea routes, what are some of the losses that Ukrainian producers have suffered as of today? When we are talking about losses, so the calculations vary here. What we've seen using the assessment of the Ministry of Agrarian Policy, so that's the ministry in charge of agricultural produce. So we're not talking about losses, we are talking about the drops of revenue. $170 million a day, so this is what we are missing at the moment. That was expected. So you can make simple calculation and add up how much we under receive monthly when we are talking about blocked ports, plus the looting, because the grain is stolen on temporarily occupied territory, and not only grain. We've seen some theft from Mariupol or from other industries. So when you add up all this plus the damage that was caused to the infrastructural objects and capacity, elevators, logistic facilities, so the damage is definitely much bigger. The estimates that are circulating today, so they are talking about $6 billion or even more. We have another question. My name is Vakumko Bogdan. I'm the representative of Health Here Ukraine. What part of agricultural agrarian goods makes GDP of Ukraine, and how many people can be involved in providing jobs in such sectors, given new reality? Since we have the direct correlation, we know about the GDP this year. We know that the drop made 30–40% of GDP. And of course, the share of sectors that contributed to GDP also drops. And the same is true about Ukrainian agrarian complex and industrial complex. I don't know if there will be any serious drop in percentage-wise figures. Speaking of exports, yes, the export unfortunately suffers, but we keep producing a lot of agricultural produce, and agrarian sector in many regions of Ukraine has very strong position. But speaking about giving new jobs in this sector, this could be one of the drivers that would help us find a way out of this situation, and given how big the unemployment in Ukraine is. What's happening in Ukraine. So this is objective and logical process, but we at least need to address these issues in regions. For example, we can involve internally displaced people in agricultural sector. They can get jobs in processing facilities, in small and medium companies, because first of all, we are talking about the safety and security of the country. So that will be the food stocks, food supplies for Ukraine, because of the chain supplies that have also been affected. We can probably consider what sort of goods could be produced locally: dairy products, vegetable, fruit, other types of products that do not require a lot of investment initially, but people can be involved. They can get jobs. If they can find jobs elsewhere, so they can be involved in this sector. Also, we can offer jobs to war veterans, so they can actually find their place in agrarian sector. And it's also good psychotherapy. And plus, it's good quick employment. Starting from 1991 until today, there were a lot of industries and sectors in Ukraine, but we understand that agrarian is going to be one of the leading sectors from today on. So do you think that Ukraine will be the leading agricultural country? What is your question? Can Ukraine become agrarian country? I see it as a positive development. I believe that agrarian sector will give the impetus to its development. So Ukraine will not be the agrarian country, but the country of innovative economies. It will be both agrarian and innovative country, and these two things are not in discrepancy. I always talk about examples of the Netherlands, Germany, that export a lot of agrarian produce, and they are highly technologically developed countries. So I believe that it can also be possible in Ukraine in the reconstruction of the country after the war. Thank you very much. Our guest was Olga Trofimtseva, Ambassador at Large with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, coordinator of the Exporters and Investors Council. Our next guest will be Anka Feldgusen, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Federal